Hello, friends. That's Phoebe. She's chilling here too. Today, I just wanted to come on live because I've been watching some old videos of me riding and working with horses. And it has been nostalgic, but it's also been interesting to kind of look back and watch videos that, like, in theory, in my head, like, I remember going to those shows and working with those horses. And I remember, like, learning to ride on the horses that I did, but I remember it differently than how I see now because when I was living in that mindset as like a youngster and exposed to a lot of the practices I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and I didn't have the ability to read horses in the same way, and I was entirely dependent on the expertise of my trainer and the people around me. And it's really interesting to look back on stuff because obviously, like, it's really cute to see like videos of you as a kid doing stuff with horses, and that's nice. But looking back on some of the show clips, like, I'm going to do a video that I'll edit and I'll include the actual clips in at some point. But I was watching back some of the show videos of me showing as like a 5-year-old, and the horse I'm riding is very lame. And looking back at that is kind of sad because I don't have a single memory of ever thinking that that horse was in pain or ever thinking there is anything wrong with her. Like, I truly had no idea. And looking back now and seeing the degree of the lameness and being able to recognize it right away, it's really sad to me because when I got into horses as a young kid, I got into riding because I just loved horses and I wanted to be around horses. All I did was like live, breathe horses. I played with horses. I only read books about horses. I just desperately wanted to be around horses because I loved them. And I was brought into a situation where my role model did not set the best examples. And again, this isn't to just criticize my previous trainers because I don't think that the vast majority of horse people are actually out there to like maliciously do wrong by their horses. But they were the adults in the situation and they were the most experienced people and we were paying them to train me. And unfortunately, I was taught a lot of bad practices from them. And also, like, as a trainer, especially like when you're the owner of the horse, sending a lame horse to a show to be ridden around on by a child, I think is an extremely poor taste, especially when the lameness is not at all masked. Like, it's not even like this horse had steroid injections to try to make her look more comfortable. Like, she's very clearly lame. So it's on the part of like all of the people in charge, which would first of all be the trainer that I had, but also like the judges and the show stewards and whatnot. Like, I get that I was just a kid, and like in the grand scheme of things, a kid riding around walk trot on a lame horse isn't as bad as it could be. And maybe they didn't want to excuse me from the class because I was a child, but that's something that I think it's sad that it didn't get handled because as a child, I couldn't have advocated for that horse. I didn't know better. And I was exposed to a lot of problematic norms that then colored all of my views of horses for years to come. And looking back and actually being able to see it in action is really interesting because I don't have that many videos of me growing up riding. And for people who aren't as old as I am, back then, like when I was first learning how to ride, like we had video cameras that filmed on tapes, like cassette tapes. Like, it wasn't like digital like it is now. So having a video camera in the first place was something a little bit more unusual. And also, like, taking lots of video and spending the money to get lots of tapes in the first place was also unusual. So I don't have that much footage of me riding. And it's disappointing to see that the footage I do have is completely like the horse is not sound. And I haven't gone through everything I have yet, but all of the clips I've seen, the horse is lame in. And this is a horse that I loved. Like, I named like my stuffed animals after her. I still have one that I named after her. And like, I adored this horse and I adored all the horses that I worked with. And I rode them because I loved them and I never would have wanted to hurt them. And if I knew that I was hurting them, I wouldn't have wanted to do what I was doing. But I was taught so many things that encouraged me to cause harm to horses and also encouraged me to ignore stress behaviors or indicators of pain. And because I was never actually taught how to acknowledge and address those things, like as a child, how the heck are you supposed to know better? You can't. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff you learn in childhood is carried with you into adulthood. So it impacted like how I handled horses even after having left that trainer. And when I was with the trainer, which was for years, it would have impacted my handling of those horses for the many years that I was with her. But even following that, like the practices and beliefs that I was taught, I didn't know to question every single one of them. There were some things that I started to question when I moved to different trainers, but there was so much that this person taught me that in order to question everything, like it's just not something that you can reasonably expect a kid to do, especially when they're not immediately being directed to role models or resources to learn that. So I had years and years and years of having stress behaviors normalized to me and completely ignored and not being taught how to read them. And it made it so that even when I got my own horse eventually, like I couldn't advocate for him in the way that I should have been able to because I wasn't taught what behaviors were associated with pain or stress. My Arab that I had, almost every time that I rode him, he would bolt and he would be spooking at everything, spooked at the same corner of the arena all the time. And it was incredibly frustrating to me. I didn't understand why. It made me mad at him, and I thought he was doing it on purpose, and it ruined parts of our relationship, and it also ruined my enjoyment of riding him. But his behavior was directly correlated with the fact that he wasn't getting turned out enough and he wasn't getting out enough. But I hadn't been taught that that was an underlying cause. And instead, what I'd been taught to do is that when he's bad, like you need to get after him. He's being bad. You need to dominate him. See a seesaw in his mouth, make him back up 500 steps, put on some draw reins and ride him around in draw reins all the time if he's not settling. And all of these solutions that weren't actually addressing the problem, but they were just like covering it up and serving to mask it, and also providing me, a child, a very easy means of taking out my anger and frustration on a horse. And since I'd been taught that horses did do things on purpose and they would do things maliciously and that he was just misbehaving intentionally, it also made me way more mad at him than I would have been if I hadn't been taught that. And honestly, like this taught me so many bad habits that I've carried into like even human to human interactions, because it didn't teach me how to like properly address my own behaviors or my horse's behaviors or understand where they're coming from. And it just taught me to view behaviors as like at a face value, like, oh, he's just doing this to be annoying, not like, oh, this behavior is the symptom of an underlying motivation. I was never taught that. And I was also taught a very cursory knowledge on equine behavior in general, like stall vices, which I saw a dime a dozen. Like the barn was full of horses with stall vices. I was taught wrong what they were. So I never knew to identify them as stress behaviors in the first place. And honestly, for like much of my childhood growing up, like I literally couldn't access the information on the internet as it is today because the internet was not what it was today. And I did read horse books. I literally only read horse books. It was a thing that in school, teachers actually expressed concern to my parents about because they didn't like the fact that I only wanted to read horse books. So it wasn't even like I was closed off to wanting to learn. Like I literally wanted to get my hands on everything horsey, but there was an extreme lack of resources. And I think that that's important to talk about because also for people who are in situations like this, I think it's important to realize like the degree of misinformation and the degree of lack of regulation in the horse industry, because it all contributes to all of this. And I want to get into some more recent stuff too, but I wanted to talk about like where I came from first and how that has impacted how I think today and how it impacted a lot of my training practices, because it was literally never even suggested to me that like rewards-based training or positive reinforcement was even an option. And like I'm not even talking for like the first part of my horse experience. I'm talking like literally until I was like 16 to 18 years old, basically. Like it was just not a thing. I was taught if you hand feed horses, they'll bite you. If you're going to feed them treats, always feed them from a bucket. And in all honesty, I did stop doing that because I was a kid and I'm not going to carry a freaking bucket around with me all the time. And my horse didn't start to bite me more. So I kind of wondered about that. But like I was not taught that these things were options. And in addition to that, like a lot of the role models, it's not even just trainers. Like we're talking farriers, some vets, and all sorts of high profile people in the horse world, like judges, stewards, like industry professional, like professors at universities even. Because yeah, a lot of horse colleges, not all of them are built the same. Some of them are really, really good and they're backed in scientific research, but there's also a number of horse colleges that teach incredibly outdated information and portray it as fact. So the problem is we have all these resources now that horse people can in theory seek, but there is such poor regulation that like when you're seeking these resources, they're not all built the same. You could seek a resource that is outdated or completely untrue. For example, like farriers. I talked about this in another live with like Milo's hoof problems, but like the farrier industry in the horse world is not well regulated at all. And the problem with this is that you have all these people who get to pose as experts on hooves while perpetuating a lot of outdated information that we now know to contribute to a lot of problems in the hoof. And the amount of farriers there are that perpetuate this outdated information and aren't moving on to modernizing their practice is so high that even people who are motivated to want to do better for their horses and want to select the best resources for them are often stopped in doing that because the people that they try to seek those resources from are not doing what is in the best interest of the horse. And it's not even that the people are necessarily doing that intentionally. It's that there's so much misinformation and so much resistance to new information that people don't change. And there's also a lack of regulatory boards to ensure that people actually have the knowledge they need to uphold the jobs that they do. So then, like with my Arab, like for those of you who haven't shown Arabs or like Morgans or saddlebreds or any of the circuits where they use like the shoeing practices that they do to change the horse's movement, like with my Arab, he wore pads and toe weights all show season because we wanted him to move bigger. Kind of like saddle seat, but not to the same degree of like padding and heaviness, but close. And we would grow his toes out way too long to increase movement as well. And farriers never told us that there is any fallbacks to this. They didn't tell us it wasn't healthy for his feet. My trainer never taught us that. We had no idea. And then when we eventually got out of the Arabian circuit, because I hit the point where things were going like in a really difficult direction with my family, and we couldn't afford to show as much as I used to. And I was just also kind of like burnt out and frustrated about being at show barns, and I didn't want to ride anymore. Like I was literally about to quit riding, but I wasn't ready to sell my horse at that point. So we moved to like a smaller barn that was just like a pleasure riding barn where he started getting turned out 24/7. And the immediate difference in his behavior was so huge that it was like suddenly like it was kind of like an epiphany where I was like, wait a second. Like I was taught that this way, like the stall paddock living situation where they're going like 8 hours outside in like a small paddock and then back in their stall overnight for the vast majority of their time. I was taught that that was like the way horses needed to be cared for and that there was no detriments to it, no problem with it. And that like, this is how show horses live. So suddenly when I have my show horse out in group turnout and he's no longer bolting, no longer spooking, suddenly super easy to ride, beginner safe. That was really eye-opening to me because I was like, holy crap, like the only thing that we've like changed immensely in his management was the turnout. So it was very easy for me to look at that anecdotally and go, okay, like this has to be what has changed his behavior. And from then on, I started to really question a lot of what I had learned. And this is kind of what led me down the path of doing more and more research and learning new things. But it wasn't like an immediate shift because there is so much misinformation that I had been taught on so many levels in the horse world that like to actually shift away from that mindset and learn, like I had so much to relearn. And do you know how much harder it is to learn shit when you've been taught to do things the opposite way and you've been taught that that's right? And when there's still so many in the people in the horse world who have more years of experience than you that will look you in the eye and be like, nope, you're wrong. Even if what you're saying is scientifically proven, like relearning stuff and having to completely redo your education and learn about horses as you know it is way harder than just learning it correctly from the first time because you have to undo all of these bad habits. So moving my Arab into that new situation and actually seeing how it changed his behavior, that was the biggest eye-opening move that I had made for like that length of my horse career. But like by the time I had moved him, I had had that horse for 6 or 7 years. So the poor thing had spent 6 or 7 years in a less than ideal management circumstance being punished for problem behaviors that were the direct result of his management issues. And that I found frustrating, but I did not know why he was behaving that way. So I just dealt with it the way that I had been taught, which was not fair to him. And then eventually when I sold him and started getting into the thoroughbred things, like the one big improvement I had made at that point was the turnout. So the horses were all out on group turnout and got to live a more normal life, which is great. But then I still had to address a lot of the other holes in my training and management and understanding of horse behavior that had been taught to me. Like, for example, grain. I didn't know that horses didn't need grain. I fed way too much grain. The horses didn't get enough hay and they didn't get enough high quality hay and they weren't getting their nutritional needs met. So I would keep pumping them full of grain if they'd lose weight and they still wouldn't look that good at all. And I didn't understand why, but I had just been taught like, oh, horses need grain. Like it's part of their diet. They need it. And I didn't know better. So that was a steep learning curve to eventually switch away from, and that literally took years. Like I only stopped feeding my horses like grain like within the last year, and like I've heavily reduced the amount of grain that they've gotten leading up to that. Like probably within the last like 4 years, my horses have been getting very little grain, but it's been recently that they've actually gone on forage only diets. And it took me a long time to get off of feeding too much grain because it was just so normalized. And it's like, it's not even like it's just people within your own barn. It's like if you go to your friends' barns, if you go to horse shows, if you watch TV, if you watch your favorite trainers online, if you see what upper level pros are doing, it's everywhere. It's not even just the echo chamber within your barn. Like the industry itself is a massive echo chamber of misinformation, full stop. And with nutritional stuff, a lot of the people advising on equine nutrition aren't equine nutritionists. They're trainers and they have no formal education in equine nutrition. And they're peddling a lot of misinformation to their gullible clients because they're framing themselves as some expert on these topics when they are not that. And it's okay not to be the expert. Like I've actually done university level equine nutrition classes, and I would still not be comfortable giving people nutritional advice or trying to balance diets or trying to make diets for horses that I don't know. Like I can do my own horses' diets, but I even do that with the assistance of nutritionists. But there's so many trainers who are pretending to be experts on everything, even with very, very little education on the topics they speak on. And now we'll go into farrier work, because obviously this has been a very well-known fact with how much Milo has struggled with his feet. And quite frankly, I have nothing to hide because I've shared so much of his journey online. Yes, he struggled with farrier work. Yes, his feet were utter fucking shit for a long time. They sucked. They were horrible. Honestly, most, if not all of his soundness issues, I would attribute to his hooves. Definitely his collateral ligament injury on the right front that he had several years ago was a very minor one, but 100% attributable to his farrier practice. Now, that all aside, I am not a farrier. I was not an equine hoof professional. I was entirely at the mercy of the professionals in the field. And I'll tell you, like, the most frustrating thing about Milo's hooves is it's not like we just were like, oh yeah, this is fine, we're going to leave them like this, we see no problem with this. Like literally 6+ years ago, like we got my vet out to x-ray his feet. Yeah, probably 6 or 7 years ago. So a year, maybe 2 after I got him, he got hoof x-rays. We got the vet to look at his feet and give advice, and they recommended he needs his toe shortened a lot and he needs a better heel, and he has no sole. So we knew all these things, brought it to the farrier, and wanted to make these changes, and we wanted to give the farrier enough time to make them. And there was a lot of resistance, and it's not just a singular farrier. It was more than one, numerous farriers where they would go, oh, well, your vet's not a farrier. So like, why doesn't your vet just come trim your horse then? Like verbatim, I had been told that by a farrier, and we were giving them advice and like the x-rays from our vets and our recommendations from our vets, and then having that veterinary advice mocked by people who are supposed to be hoof professionals. And on top of that, a lot of farriers do still do traditional shoeing practices with open heeled shoes, which we now know cause caudal failure. And a lot of farriers themselves aren't aware of what they're even doing. Like they're not aware of the detriments of traditional shoeing practices and how little growth there has been, despite how much more we know about hooves. So again, it's not even like these farriers are just scamming people intentionally. I'm not saying that. There's just so much misinformation that even perceived professionals are perpetuating this misinformation. So I went through like several different farriers with Milo. Like we had him barefoot for a while, like when he was really, really young. And when they'd trim him, they would make him sore. And instead of suggesting dietary changes or other aspects that could improve his hoof quality, the first suggestion was putting him in shoes. So by the time he was 3, we were shoeing him. And like I said, my training at this point was still very influenced from what I'd learned. So he was terrible for the farrier. So the farriers also couldn't properly do their jobs because he wasn't good for the farrier. And then the first farrier that put shoes on him, unfortunately, within the first cycle, his feet, like I didn't notice it at the time because obviously growth, when you're seeing the horse on a daily basis, it doesn't happen where you're like, holy shit, his feet are fucked now. But when I look back now and I compare pre-trim before he got his shoes versus the first cycle of shoes, the amount of damage that it caused to his feet is absurd. Like his heel got so underran and the toe so long within that one cycle that it was insanity. So we pretty quickly switched farriers again after that. And like same thing, like we're constantly trying to advocate for this horse and say what the vet's recommendations are and say like asking for advice, like saying he is really thin heel, thin soles. Like how can we address this? And some of them would have ideas. They tell us like the direction they'd want to head in. But then they like there wasn't enough change. And like so at one point it's like, okay, we've put like a year or two or more into this different farrier, but like our vet is still telling us that there's problems with his feet and that they have concerns about like the damage it can do for the angles and so on and so forth. And like we're desperately trying to say this to farriers and trying to get like the point across, but not being listened to and also being spoken down to at the same time because we're not farriers and we don't have that education. So at that point it's like you're helpless because it's like, what are you supposed to do? You've tried a bunch of different professionals within the same job in your area and they're all telling you the same or similar things and there's very little change in the horse's hooves. So then when you're online and you're sharing stuff about your horse and people are then blaming you for your horse's feet and saying, oh, your horse's feet suck, you're terrible, like your horse's feet are terrible, you clearly don't care about him, you're not advocating for him and so on and so forth, and they put all the blame on you, then you get defensive and you want to defend like yourself and be like, I am doing what I can for my horse though, and this is what a professional has told me to do. And then that kind of makes people lay into their beliefs more sometimes where they're not open to learning other ways because a lot of people go on the attack and blame people for the work that is actually attributable to another professional who is supposed to be able to give the advice that they're giving. And then that was really hard too. So like, yeah, I'm sure people can go back on my posts over the years and be like, oh, well, you defended Milo's feet here, here, and here. And it's like, well, yeah, I did from random strangers online attacking me in specific. And also it was like a reflection of the frustration I felt because we were trying to advocate for him and help him like the whole time. I have like the whole, like I have vet records for years and I have posts for years. Like there is a paper trail of all of this for how hard we were trying to advocate for this damn horse. But it's hard to advocate for an animal within an industry where that's so poorly regulated that there's a lot of people who can give out misinformation under the guise of being professionals. So it's probably only been within the last 3 years that we've actually been on the right track in terms of farrier care. And the reason for that was kind of by chance because when I was taking Milo to a show one time, we needed to put corks in his shoes. So he needed hind shoes because he needed studs. And the only farrier I could get available out to do that soon enough was a different farrier who happened to be a farrier that had a background in barefoot trimming and had started doing like rehabilitative hoof care with shoes as well. So she was the one that actually did his corks. And when she saw his feet, she's like, holy shit, like his feet are terrible. Like, and like she took the time to explain to me the problems with the feet and why, and what contributed to these problems, what caused these problems, what injuries and issues these problems could cause. And since she took the time to actually educate me and teach me about these things in a way that no one else had, that kind of set a light bulb off in my head. And then following that trim cycle, I switched my horses to her. And then we started shoeing Milo in a better way, like in a way that was more about rehabbing his feet rather than kind of like Band-Aid fixing it and masking it. So we started doing like pour-in pads and other types of frog support because he wasn't at the point where he could go barefoot cold turkey. Like he would have been lame as snot. And doing what we could to help him. And then there was some immediate changes in him that were like immediately noticeable to me. And that was kind of like, okay, like we're on the right track now, finally. But like we're talking like 5+ years on the wrong track before we start getting on the right track. And at that point, like the amount of damage you can do to your horse with chronically bad hoof issues and not getting them resolved or addressed in the way they needed to, like, is a lot. Because honestly, for me, like even just a farrier looking at me and saying, hey, like I can't fix your horse's feet in the way you need while you're still riding him. If you want me to actually help him, you need to give him time off. No one told me that. I didn't know that there were other options. And yeah, like I could have taken more of an initiative to go do the research myself. But when you've had decades of misinformation fed to you by people you trust, you don't really know where to start looking. And there's also an inherent distrust in information coming from other sources that you don't know very well. So it's hard to do. And like, yeah, we like it would have been way better if his feet issues had been addressed sooner, but like the regulation issue in the horse world contributes to a lot of owners making mistakes in the welfare and handling of their horses that they wouldn't otherwise make because they're being lied to and misled by people who are supposed to be more knowledgeable than they are. And then they get defensive of their care because they've been told they're doing the right thing. So then when people criticize it, it's like, screw you. Like I've been told by people I trust that I'm doing everything fine and there's nothing wrong. And they don't even know how to fathom reading between the lines and recognizing certain behavioral issues because they've never been taught how to do that. And I've shown my whole ass online doing that publicly because I've criticized positive reinforcement over the years. I've criticized stuff like target training because I didn't see the purpose of it. And I said it was useless and it was just like games, which is a load of shit. It's a very useless, I mean, it's a very useful skill to teach. I was just stupid and I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was kind of perpetuating the mindset of a lot of the people who had mentored and trained me. And then when I started using new things and seeing that they worked and seeing how they worked, that caused like such a shift in mindset that now it's like, okay, like I'm not willing to say that certain things are not harmful when I know that they are, even if that offends other people who are in the same state that I was at that point. Like if people want to continue doing what they want with their horses, by all means, but like if you're people don't owe it to you to say that the misinformation you're putting out is true. And I think we all need to kind of start cracking down on that misinformation because it's harming a lot of horses and it's also harming their owners by default because it's frustrating owners. They're not getting ahead in their riding. They're not able to address behavioral issues. They're not understanding why their horse is having so many soundness struggles because they're not actually being told what is causing them. And then they don't know how to address them. And it leads them to frustration and it leads them to not enjoying their horses as much. And they have no idea why. They don't know where to start. And it's a real shame because most people who have horses get into horses because they love them. And then unfortunately, you get people who are poisoned by the industry and how normalized it is to be harsh with horses and how normalized it is to do really cruel training practices that are completely reliant in causing fear, stress, or pain for control. And some people like that control and then they'll lay into that control and they want to use those harsh tactics all the time because it makes them feel powerful and it makes them feel like they're in control. And then sometimes that can lead to them not valuing the horse's welfare as much and they'll choose to be that way over valuing their horse. But most people in the horse world actually do love and care about their horses. And the only reason they go into this cognitive dissonance is to protect themselves from the realization that they caused their horse harm. But honestly, like realizing that too late down the road sucks way more because then you don't have any chance to rectify the wrongs you've done to your horse. Like with my Arab, for example, he got so few years of fair care with me because I hadn't learned early enough to help him out. So now I can look back at all the wrongs I did to him and regret them and wish that I'd done it better, but I didn't have enough time to be the type of horse person that I am now. And now with Milo, I've had Milo for 8 years as of this year. And like with him, like I've been his advocate more so than I have for any other horse. Because honestly, with a horse like him and how many behavioral issues he's had, people can say what they will about me. But if you pawned that horse off onto like almost anyone else, it would have, especially 8 years ago, finding someone who would be willing to consider his personality and his stressors and his fears to the extent that I have, and who would be willing to start using positive reinforcement and wouldn't take the easy way out of just going to trainers that will punish him and try to make him do what you want, especially when those trainers are basically the only ones you can find. Finding someone that's willing to do that is not the norm, because the norm in the horse world is using these harsh types of training methods and mislabeling behavior. That's the norm right now. So people can say what they will about me not being quick enough to address his care, but in all honesty, like I don't think he would have been more fortunate in another home, and that's a hill I will die on, because with how difficult he was as a 2-year-old before it was attributable to pain issues, people would have been mean to him. The advice that I got on what to do with him, and I didn't do everything right, and I would have done, like, if I had him now, I would have done things differently. But the advice that I got on how to deal with his behavioral problems, like the nipping, that was very clearly related to overstimulation and being a baby. I got told to just punch him in the face, to hit him in the face, to slap him in the face, to make him back up like the length of a freaking driveway, to hold a nail with the pointed side out to his face so when he turns towards me and tries to bite me, he hits the nail. And like, those were the advices that I got given, and it was by numerous different horse people across my entire geographic location, plus other people online. Like, I've had people suggest the most insane training practices to address his issues. And like, that is the norm in the horse world. Like, positive reinforcement and rewards-based training and science-based training is not the norm currently. So I wish that I had gotten a handle on his issues sooner, and that I had started to adopt softer methods sooner, and that I'd started to get better role models and better help sooner. But I had tried to, and it's not my fault that the industry doesn't protect from misinformation. It isn't. It shouldn't just be solely on the owner, especially when we're talking amateur and junior owners who are at the mercy of their trainers, recommendations for farriers, vets, and also their general training advice. The responsibility should not be on the people who are not the industry professionals to do everything right for their horse and advocate for their horse to such an extent that they can completely tell when like any professional is misleading them, because that requires such a knowledge base that is not fair to expect from people who are not professionals and who are not educated on these topics. It's not fair to expect them to be able to do that. The industry needs to regulate things to make them more fair to the horse and to ensure that this misinformation isn't passed around, because the lack of respect that there currently is in the industry for science and research is a direct result of how much misinformation we've allowed to be spread, because there's so much distrust in the other side, despite the fact that the science side is way more research and way more credible. People have distrust in that because it takes things to seemingly such an extreme from what they've been taught, because they've been taught that far astray and that wrong. And I say this as someone who comes from that exact background. And I do understand the way I go about things sometimes, because I'm very like blunt and kind of matter of fact with how I say things, especially when I'm just talking about behaviors and what causes them. It can come off as offensive, and I get that, but also like, I think that like it is kind of matter of fact. And I say it because like I'm criticizing my old self. Like when I talk about stalling and how much I hate people who stall horses all the time, I'm talking about myself that I hated that I did that to my horse, because I've directly seen the results of how it impacted that horse and also how it impacted other horses that I work with now. So I'm mad at myself. I'm not mad at the people who are following the instructions of professionals that are lying to them. I'm mad at myself, and I'm mad at the industry, and I'm mad at professionals that lie to people. And I'm mad that there isn't more regulation in this industry to prevent this from happening. So it's a really pervasive problem. And honestly, like, yeah, like people tell me all the time, why don't you mind your own business and just worry about your own horses? And it's like, yeah, I could do that, but then I just get to watch people continue to do the same things that I did to my horses and that I immensely regret. And honestly, now, like with Milo's MRI, there is a chance that that MRI is going to come back with some terrible chronic injury that is the direct result of his farrier care. And if that is the case, I'm the one that has to live with that. Not anyone online criticizing me. I'm the one who has to live with that, because I'm the one who made those decisions. And at the end of the day, chose those professionals who I thought were going to help him. So I'm the one that gets to live with that if it's something that causes me to either lose my horse or have to retire him. And no one else is going to have to deal with that. Not anyone online who likes to use Milo as a reason to criticize me as a trainer and the points I make. I am the only one who is going to have to deal with the immense pain and sadness and guilt that will cause me, because I'm well aware of the fact that we didn't get his problems dealt with soon enough. I'm well aware of the fact of how many years I wasted training the wrong way and how many years I wasted following incorrect advice that actually harmed my horse. However, now that I'm trying to do the right thing, all I can do is do what I can do now. I can't jump in a time machine and change how his feet were done, because if I could, I would have already done that. I can't jump in a time machine and go help my 5-year-old self to get a better role model, because if I could, I would have already done that. So now basically I'm in a situation where my horse could have chronic issues that are directly impacted by how crappy his angles were, and also potentially impacted by the fact that he was starved, because he could have some anomalies in how he grew and functioned because he didn't get enough nutrition as a baby. That's always a possibility. But I would wager it's going to be an injury that's directly related to his shoeing and his farrier practices over the last many years. And that's also why I'm so worried about the MRI, because the amount of like effort I have had to put into advocating for him to get to the point that we have today, and to get to like being on the cusp of hopefully getting an answer. I'm going to be honest with people, because we over the years, I have basically done yearly regular soundness exams with Milo, because out of sheer paranoia, because little behaviors or little differences in his behaviors would concern me to the point where I wouldn't be able to function and relax normally without getting my vet to confirm that it was okay with me. So he's done a lot of imaging and diagnostics over the years, and just to make sure he's comfy and okay, especially following like the injury that he did have like 5 or 6 years ago now. And like there's been a lot of diagnostics there. So it's not like we've been not trying to advocate for him. And like the behaviors that I notice in my horses now and that cause me concern are so minor compared to how big the red flags would have had to have been back several years ago for me to notice them and be concerned. And that's an indicator of immense growth, because honestly, like what caused me to get this next lameness exam with him, like the recent one that led us to getting the MRI requisition, is like we've been since like 2020, he's just kind of had like intermittent behavioral issues. Like I say behavioral because it wasn't always clear soundness issues. Sometimes, a lot of the times over the years, he would pass blocks, he would pass flexions, he would pass lameness exams, other than like the hoof testers, and we already knew he had thin soles, so that wasn't an overly concerning thing. He would pass the blocks, he would pass flexions, and even when he had his tendon injury, he passed a flexion exam. And when you flex an injured tendon, they should, in theory, be sore. He wasn't. So I think that's an indicator for how stoic he is, but also like I want to kind of reiterate what some of the red flags for his behaviors were, because I think people are mistaken in like the degree some people let it get to look at things. Like for his last lameness exam, like in 2020, when we got the ulcer diagnosis, he wasn't unsound on the ground. Like I could free lunge him, he looked fine, he looked great, he was fine. But if I got on his back, he didn't want to go forward under saddle. So I was like, this is not normal. I stopped riding him. I took him to the vet. He got scoped. We found that he had grade 3 ulcers. He got treated for ulcers. After getting treated for ulcers, he was better, but he still was cranky under saddle, and he was pinning his ears when I would try to get on him, which is so abnormal. But he was sound. Like if I decided to take a whip and crack him on the ass and make him go forward, he didn't look unsound. But I didn't want to do that because I had learned how to do things better at this point, and I didn't want to just force him to go forward when he was telling me something was wrong. So following the ulcers, brought him into the vet. We did a full lameness exam with blocks and blocked it out to his stifle and PRP'd his stifle, which is like a injection where you basically take like a serum of their blood and whip it up and then inject it directly into the affected joint to speed up healing. And then he went into a rehabilitation program, and he was doing well with that, and he was doing well in his hoof rehab, and he did still have some sole soreness, especially on that right front. But with what the x-rays were telling us with the density of his soles, it wasn't necessarily surprising. And he also didn't really have great angles at this point, and he didn't have enough wall or heel to actually lift his foot off of the ground in the way that it needed to. So that wasn't overly concerning at this point. He came back into rehab. We were doing some stuff. Then I got busy with work, and I stopped riding him, not because he wasn't sound, but because I didn't have time. And I also wanted to pull his shoes and turn him out over the summer of 2021, so that he could go chill in a field and just be a horse, and hopefully continue developing his hoof health in the field, which honestly really helps. Being out on the field bettered his hooves more than anything. Like having that time off and just being out on grass, huge. And he was sound. He was sound out on the field. He's running around. He's doing great. Awesome. Brought him back into a little bit of work over the fall. Did some trail riding. He was good. didn't do much else after that because then we had all that atmospheric river stuff over the winter, and he sat and doing nothing and just kind of chilled for the winter. And then coming into the spring, he had another check during the, like, I think in January, and then he got checked again when he had his teeth done in February. And like in February, I didn't really have time to do anything with him. March, I started trying to do groundwork with him, and I was hacking him like walk, trot, under saddle. He wasn't feeling like when I ride, especially, like, even if horses look decent on the ground, when I ride, I can really feel like the difference in push off with different legs. And his push off on the right hind was not normal. So when I did ride him, I'd get on for like 5 minutes and I would just like do little stuff, because again, like, this horse has a locking stifle, and for those of you who don't know what a locking stifle is, it's a mechanical lameness, and exercise actually helps it, and lack of exercise makes it worse. So since we knew this, the suggestion was to kind of go into his regular stifle rehab program after time off, which I did do, but he just wasn't behaving normally. And then other things that I noticed were little tiny behavioral issues that no one else would notice if my horse was on full board. The only reason I notice these things is because I live on property and I've had this horse for 8 years, and I know him so well that I started to notice these tiny deviations in his posture. He started to stand with that right stifle with the toe turned inwards just a little bit, and he'd stand like that when he's just standing, and I was like, that's really weird. Why is he standing with his toe turned inwards? And it was to like alleviate pressure from the stifle in theory. And then with his hoof, like the front right, what he started doing, not all the time, intermittently, but he did it today too. When I saw him, when he's laying down, he'd lay down, and it would almost be like how they lay down when they're about to get up, where he just kind of park that front right out a little bit so he didn't have to bend and flex it as much. And that's not normal. It's not normal. It's not how he usually lays down. It's not normal. He does it right before he's about to get up, but laying and staying like that for like 20 minutes of his nap, not wanting to bend his hoof, not his hoof, his leg, but not normal. Like, and it's a little niggling thing that I have noticed, and I've just been like, okay, like that's weird. That shouldn't be happening. And that is kind of what is making me wonder, like, okay, does he have a soft tissue injury that is below the hoof capsule that we don't see? Because that would make sense. If you have a soft tissue injury, why you wouldn't want to bend your leg. And we already know that this horse is stoic because he passed a soundness exam with a soft tissue injury before. And when we found it, the only reason we found it is because of my perseverance and my persistence in getting him looked at, because the only tells that we had for that initial soft tissue injury were that he started tripping a little bit under saddle, which is a pretty good tell. And then the other tell was that he had some edema in the leg, which again, for like tendon injuries, also pretty good tell. But then when you image the leg and you don't find anything, then it's kind of like, the horse is not blocking out. They're not flexing unsound, and they aren't showing up in imaging. And then finally we did catch like a tiny tear in imaging, and then that's when he got rested at that point. But that was several years ago now. So now we're at the point where I'm worried that like perhaps that injury that he had several years ago also had some damage lower down that maybe wasn't completely remedied, or perhaps the stress that his hoof angles have put on his legs for the last many years have created lasting soft tissue issues that we cannot image. Even for the stifle, like having crappy hoof angles certainly doesn't help that. The locking stifle was thought to be more attributable to the fact that he wasn't fed when he was younger, so he didn't have the muscle tone that a 2-year-old should have had at the time that I got him, so he didn't have anything to really support that joint. And then when you factor that in with the fact that he also had nutritional deficits for years, especially during like a vital growing period, it's not necessarily abnormal to have an issue with that, especially since it was like his only issue that was like abundantly obvious, because you really can't miss a locking stifle when it actually locks. His stifle hasn't locked in a long time, like not since he was like a baby. So when he does have stifle issues, it's usually just that he's like a little stiff. And when he works and gets into a program and builds muscle again, it's usually better. Now, he also is extremely overweight right now. And that could contribute to his lack of comfort, because obviously having more weight on sore joints or sore hooves isn't helpful. However, I think that his weight has changed to the extent that it has because due to discomfort, he's been moving around less. And obviously, he's not been in a work program. With what he's eating, he should not have put on the amount of weight that he has. And until recently, like until we started kind of doing the diagnostics, he wasn't moving around as much as he normally does. Like I've seen it. He didn't run and play with the other horses as much as he used to. And there was just some behavioral changes like that. So there's like a number of things that I've had on this checklist that I've been checking off over the course of literal years trying to address. And the fact that there's like such a lack of support and so much misinformation in the horse world is a problem. I am really fortunate to have the vet that I do, because she has been very involved in Milo's care and trying to address this and taking what I've said about his behavior and like these little differences that I've noticed in how he behaves and how he stands, and taking them seriously, even when there was an absence of diagnostics to actually prove it. And in the past, when I have tried to talk to other vets about this, I've been recommended to just do corticosteroid injections and just like inject the area where he's presenting sore. Like even like, oh, why don't you just inject the coffin joint? No. Corticosteroids mask pain and they would make him temporarily sound, almost guaranteed, yes. But he would be moving around and feeling good on injuries that aren't being addressed because the steroid isn't going to remedy what the problem is. And there's no sign of arthritis. Like the most frustrating thing about this horse is like the amount of diagnostics and like x-rays we've done. Like he's had his entire spine x-rayed. He's had like virtually every single joint, like including his knees x-rayed, and no arthritis, no chips, no OCD, nothing. And usually with horses, there will be something, especially when they have been in work and being alive as long as he has at this point. Usually there will be something, like even if it's just the start of arthritis, especially if there's like soundness issues, usually there will be a clue. And with him, there really hasn't been until this recent ultrasound where we saw the effusion around his meniscus in the stifle. But even with the hoof x-ray, like there is nothing there that is like immediately raising red flags. So for a lot of people in my shoes, in all honesty, like there's a lot of not preventative, there's a lot of treatment options out there that would make him sound, but not actually fix the issue, if that makes sense. And I could have taken any one of those issues. Like if this was actually just about me just riding and enjoying my horse, we would have just injected him with corticosteroids and I would have carried on my merry way. But I know in my heart that there is something that is not right with him. And that's why I have pursued this to the degree I have, because honestly, doing corticosteroid injections would have been way cheaper, and it would have allowed me to just keep working him and just continue on my merry way. But that's not what I want. Like, I don't want to be working and riding a horse who is like unknowingly continuing to degrade what could be chronic issues or what could be injuries that need rest that aren't being rested. Like, I don't want to trick him into thinking he's sound and have him wear his joints more and have him potentially then have an injury that gets to the point where he can no longer live with it, even with corticosteroid injections. I'd rather look into the issue and see if it's treatable and see what our treatment options are and see what we're dealing with and get to the bottom of that, and then just make a decision on what we're going to do for treatment after that. And like, I don't know, like it's very hard as a horse owner in this industry to advocate for our animals to the degree that we need to in order to protect them from misinformation. And my vet is honestly one of the few vets that I've actually seen publicly speak out against the prevalence of corticosteroid injections. And I have a lot of respect for her because of that, because it does mask soreness. And they do allow a lot of horses to continue competing at high levels and do so without showing signs of soreness. But it's at the detriment of their own joints and their own tissues and their own bodies, because they're doing hard work without knowing, like without having the pain to stop them from overworking their bodies. So having the support from someone like that has been huge, because like I don't want to do that. Like even without her support, if I had another vet that was like, oh, just inject him with corticosteroids, I've done enough research on injections at this point that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, and I would have pursued another opinion. But my vet has been great. Like we've been able to send his images for a second opinion, and I'm really fortunate that I happen to live in an area that has access to a standing MRI. So like he doesn't have to go under general to get MRI'd. So we have access to some really good diagnostic services. But I felt the need to be honest with how much advocacy and persistence this has taken, because it's not that we just wanted to put blinders on, like me or my mom. It's not that we were like, oh, we don't care about this horse and we'd rather be ignorant. Like, it's like, no, like we have had to publicly try to stand up to people who are perceived as having more knowledge than us, and be publicly condescended by them and basically told that we're stupid and that we don't know what we're talking about because we're not farriers or XYZ. And have had to take that and still continuing on trying to advocate for our horse. And again, without my vet and their support, it would have been a lot easier to have been led astray, especially with the farrier issues, because I was getting told conflicting things from either side, regardless of who I was using as my farrier. There was a lot of pushback towards the vet opinion. My dog wants out of my room, so 1 second. So yeah, it's taken time. It's taken persistence. I'm gonna just let her out because she's gonna keep crying otherwise. What? Oh. It's taken time, persistence, and also being able to monitor my horse and recognize the normals and abnormals in his behavior, like literally to the point. This wasn't just for him, but I have a camera out there so I can literally watch playback footage to see what they're doing and what they're getting up to and whether or not he's doing more. And since he has gone on the Previcox, he is way more active. Even when when he's on like the end of when it would be tapering off in terms of its efficacy, he's moving around way more. He's more comfortable. He's more himself. So that's a pretty clear sign that it's like a pain issue that is going on. And like, honestly, with a horse like him, like I already know how stoic he is. Like he survived being starved almost to death and like came out of it with like pride, and like not pride's not the right word because horses can't feel pride, but like I don't know, like just the like a will for survival. And like he is the type of horse who will mask things to his own detriment. And he would be a very easy type of horse to just kind of ignore these issues in, or do the easier way out and not do the full diagnostics, because he like I can almost guarantee you he would be sound if we did the steroid injections. So like it would be very easy to ignore. And even with like his behavioral issues that he's had, a lot of them I would attribute to stress. Like I do think the bucking after jumps was his feet. I think that he bucked on the landing side of jumps because landing on his feet hurts, because his feet were so chronically bad. And I do think that, like, I think it was in part stress, but I think it was 90% discomfort. And a lot of his free activity under saddle has been stress, because instead of like actually dealing with the stress that was causing the behaviors, I was doing the old method that I had been taught by my trainers of just riding through it and making him work through it. And in all honesty, like it worked well enough to kind of get him moving along enough, but not at the rate that I would have wanted. Like if I could look back in hindsight and see where we actually got to, like it's not at the rate that I would have wanted it to. With that said, like he is a horse that like when he's feeling good and he's out in the field, like he loves to buck and kick. Those are like his favorite moves, and striking, and sometimes rearing, but not as much so. So being able to like monitor how he behaves when he's feeling good on his own and kind of compare that to how he behaves under saddle has been super helpful in trying to identify what behaviors are stress behaviors, what behaviors are pain related, and what is just him feeling fresh and good and having too much energy. But like most of the time, yeah, like if you go back and look at our old photos, yeah, he was stressed. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not stupid. And yeah, his feet hurt him. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not stupid. I'm dealing with it now. But like, I find it weird, honestly. Like, and I do understand that, like, I'm a controversial person online, but I do find it weird how quickly people are willing to throw my past mistakes in my face to try to serve as a gotcha for what I'm doing today. Because it's like, all I can do is move on and carry on with like what I know and what I'm doing today. And like I said, like, if his MRI comes back with something terrible, I'm going to feel horrendously guilty. And that is not going to change. So I don't need anyone telling me that like I contributed to his issues, because obviously I did. But I think it's important to kind of clarify to all horse people that, like, even if you contribute to your horse's issues, I think it's important to realize how hard it is to not contribute to problems in your horses when we're being fed as much misinformation as we are, because you're not being given the resources that you need to actually properly advocate for your horse and help them. We're being prevented, we're being given misinformation. So most people are complicit in causing horses some level of discomfort or stress or pain, unless you were very fortunate with who taught you how to ride, and the resources that you had, especially if you started out as a child, because children just blindly trust and believe people that they view as smarter than they are. So it's hard not to be complicit in causing your horse discomfort, but also like the fact that you have done that, that doesn't necessarily need to read as like, oh, you're a bad person, you have been intentionally abusing your horse. So I think that like holding yourself accountable is important, but also I don't think people should hold themselves accountable to the degree where they have to like feel like a piece of garbage for not having chosen to adopt better practices sooner. Because like, if we take that route of things, when people are actively trying to better themselves, if you go, oh, well, like they didn't do that right away, though, it's like, what incentive do people have to change? There's no incentive. If you're like, oh, well, you're changing now, but by the way, you were a piece of shit 5 years ago. It's like, okay, what's the point in changing if you're going to just hold me to the same accountability as who I was 5 years ago? Like, like Milo, I know I could have done better by him, but I didn't have the resources to do it at that point. I know I could have done better by him now, but if there was if time travel existed and I had access to time travel, like, this never would have happened, because I would have gone back in time to fix it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with him. I am happy that he does seem to be more comfortable. He's really sad right now because he has to get not fasted, but on less fun hay, and like hay mixed with straw, so that he's not intaking as much food, and he has to have like a way smaller slow feed net than even what they already have, which is like the 1 inch or the half-inch ones. So he's not thrilled about that, but it's for his best interest, because I do want him to lose weight in the event, like just in case he does need to go under general anesthetic, because being fat and having to wake up from that isn't ideal. So he's doing that, but like, yeah, like there's been a lot of stuff that's gone into it. So like I had like a bunch of people asking, like, have you tested him for this, that, and the other thing? And it's like, yes, like honestly, if you thought it, he's probably been tested for it. But we've been able to narrow it down to like, no, like, okay, he's sore in this place and this place. And these have been issues that have kind of been ongoing on and off issues for quite some time. So we're pretty confident with where the issue is. We just don't know what exact structure within that location of the body is causing him discomfort. And unfortunately with the stifle, like it would have been nice to find like a bone chip or an OCD lesion or something to explain why he is sore like that, because then he wouldn't need an arthroscopy. But his x-rays are all perfect, and that's frustrating. So I guess this is a long-winded way of saying, like, as a horse owner, if you feel like there is something wrong with your horse, even in the absence of diagnostics that show that there is, you're probably right if you spend a lot of time watching them. And absence of diagnostics doesn't mean absence of issues, but you obviously are limited by what you can do if you don't have a diagnosed issue. And obviously not everyone's in the position where they can go further and do more hardcore diagnostics, but like, if you feel like something is not quite right, it probably is, and you should trust your gut, even if other professionals around you or like your farrier or whoever is telling you that you're wrong and that you're like not properly considering it, because the gut feeling matters. It matters a lot. So yeah, here's to holding myself accountable, because like honestly, like one thing, a hill I will die on is no one online is going to have the gotcha to hold me accountable for my behavior and act like I can't do it myself, because I can and I will. And maybe I haven't held myself accountable for everything yet, but I'm on a continued path of growth. So I'll get there, because 3 years ago, do you think I'd be talking like this on YouTube if you've been watching me for a while, or 5 years ago even? Do you think I'd make a video that's dishonest? Probably not. So I don't need other people to hold me accountable or try to advocate for my horse anymore, because I've gotten to the point where I can do it myself. And like that's also why like I post all the advocacy stuff I do. Like a lot of people read it as, oh, you always have to be right and you just like criticizing people and being mean, and it's like, no, it has like if at any point I am proven wrong by new research, call my ass out and send me the new research. I will happily publicly eat my words, especially if I have like literally said to you that you're wrong and then you prove me wrong at a later date. I'll give you a public shout out and I'll call myself out. Like, but until information is proven wrong, I'm inclined to stick with my beliefs with what we know about modern hoof care and like horse management practices and training, because not only does the science support what I have seen, but I've also gotten to see the difference that making all those changes has made in a bunch of different horses, not just Milo. And that is why I am so passionate about sharing it, because I know that a lot of people are just in a state of ignorance and don't know better and need the right type of video or something to reach them so that they start to question what's going on. And I know that not everyone is going to see my videos and do that right away, and they might make a lot of people defensive. But in all honesty, that defensiveness I think is part of the journey and the growth, because I got defensive too. And the reason why you get defensive like that is because deep down you know that something is not adding up and that it's not quite right, and having to deal with that internal conflict is hard. So then you kind of lash out and overdo defending yourself, because you don't want to have to grapple with the idea that you've been led so astray. So I think that's a normal part of it. But I also think that as an influencer, like I hate calling myself that, but as someone with a following and a platform, I would be using my platform super poorly if I just went about my own business, posting about my own horses and not caring about anyone else's welfare. And like, it's just like you, like, I care about other people's horses. Like, I don't just care about my horses. I care about everyone's horses. And I also care about them and their potential to feel guilt down the road, like I have, for making choices that may impact their horse poorly. Like most people who've made mistakes with their horses eventually do end up realizing it, and they feel terrible about it and they wish that they have changed it sooner. So if I can facilitate even like one person in making those changes sooner because of what I share and what I say, then I have done something well. Yeah. Holding yourself accountable doesn't have to happen all online too. It happens a lot in day-to-day life. Sometimes change in behavior and renewed advocacy is a sign of being accountable. I agree. And like, I think that that's where it's hard for people watching people online, because if they're not seeing the day-to-day changes and then they're just seeing like a change in behavior online, they'll largely view you as a hypocrite for that reason. But like, the path to growth is kind of like, I don't know, it's not linear. And like when you're learning how to adopt new practices and you're trying to go and do like the science-based training route and like, or switch your horse's hoof care, like there's going to be moments of frustration where you also have doubt in like the new practices, because it's not always going to be easy. And there's going to be instances where you want to like revert back to where you went, but like realizing how far you've come and like sticking to something and realizing how well it works, and then being proud of yourself for the fact that you have held yourself to a higher degree of accountability and increased your standards. I think that's all worth it. And until recently, I don't think I really held myself accountable online enough, like in the public eye where people can actually see me doing it. And also a lot of the people who don't like me are never going to see videos like this because they're not going to watch them. But I like doing it online too, because also hopefully it'll open the door for other people to do the same and not have so much shame in admitting that they made mistakes. Because what is way more shameful, in my opinion, is like making a mistake and then being too proud to admit that you made one to the detriment of like everyone around you and the animals around you. Like, it is way more embarrassing to realize you've made a mistake, but then lay into it and be like, I can't admit to this because I don't want people to think I'm not as knowledgeable and smart as I am, especially if it comes at the expense of your horses. So I'm hoping that by like being more open about mistakes and where I've gone wrong in my past, that it'll help other people do that. Because one of the biggest like roadblocks that I had for doing this exact thing was worrying about people from my past watching this and being mad and wanting to come after me. But if they want to be mad and if they feel targeted by what I say, then that's on them and that's not my problem. And I've realized that. So I've gotten more comfortable talking about stuff like this, because before I didn't even really want to say anything that could get like led back to my previous trainers, because people who know me and who also showed Arabs with me, they know who I used to train with. It's not really a secret. And like, if people really wanted to, they could find out. So I didn't really want to do that, but I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. I'm telling my story. And I'm also not faulting the people who did give me misinformation, because I think that they were misinformed themselves. And I hope that they've changed and altered their practices at this point. But like, I don't think that it was like a malicious intent where they were trying to teach me as a child to just like abuse horses. Like, I really don't think that that was the case. And I think that even if they are still engaging in the same practices, I don't think it's that they don't like their horses. I just think that they're doing what they've always known and what's easiest. And at this point have decided that learning things a new way is too hard. And I think a lot of people are in that state, especially a lot of people who are like lifelong equestrians that are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. I find that age group to be the most resistant to change, whereas like the younger generation seems to be a lot more pliable and more open to altering their methods. And obviously this doesn't speak for everyone, because there's people who are older and who have been around horses a long time that are changing what they do now. And there's also young people who dig their heels in and don't want to change. But even for the young people, like, I think a lot of the most loudmouth young riders that don't want to agree with scientific fact and are looking for any reason to discredit people who perpetuate it, I think a lot of those people are only like that because of their role models. And I can almost guarantee you that if you went to their barns and listened to how their trainers speak, that they would sound almost identical to their trainers, because that's exactly what I used to do. So yeah, it's something that is only going to change if we actually start to hold our industry as a whole to a higher standard, because the regulations in the horse world suck. Like, trainers have no real credentials that they need to have in order to start training professionally, like, full stop. Like, I would argue what I would like to see change in terms of training regulations is that I think all horse trainers should have to have behavioral science credentials that actually show that they can not only identify stress behaviors in horses, but also understand like how learning theory and like behavioral science works, while demonstrating knowledge of the animals that they work with. And then with trainers who are mostly focused on teaching people, I think they should have to demonstrate the knowledge of behavior in addition to an ability to understand how to train human beings and how to do so in a fair and ethical way. Because even within human to human training in the horse world, there's a lot of bullying and practices that are used that aren't effective and that are rooted in like punishment and humiliation. And I don't like that. It's not necessary. It results in a lot of kids having long-term anxiety issues and body image issues and all sorts of problems in the horse world. Like, it shouldn't be happening. And it's not fair that people are being exposed to this without their knowledge, because they go into this thinking that they're getting someone who is qualified to do their job and knows what they're talking about. So regulations are huge. And I think for farrier work too, we need way more regulatory bodies to start to mandate modernizing the industry, because it makes no sense that we're still engaging in practices that we've done for like centuries and that we now know there's better ways of doing that makes horses sounder, happier, more willing to work and improve welfare, and then just stubbornly not do it. Like, it is time to start re-educating the industry as a whole, please. Please, because we all need it and it'll benefit everyone, but most of all, it'll benefit the horses, because that's the part that gets me the most heated about all of this, because the reason why this is so personal to me is, like I said, I look at a horse like Milo and I see Milos everywhere, and I see Milos who are owned by people who don't care about what their Milo is telling them, and Milos who are chronically stressed or shut down, or who are eventually getting given away for free or sent to an auction because their behavior has become so dangerous and people don't know how to deal with it. And all those horses needed was a little bit of understanding and kindness, but now they're getting pawned off like they're just like hand-me-down clothes or something, like not an animal with thoughts and feelings. And that's why this gets me so passionate and heated, because I literally own one of the horses that could have very easily fallen through the cracks, and even with me did so to some extent because of the misinformation that I was given and the lack of regulation and resources there are in the horse world. And since horses cannot advocate for themselves, we need to do it for them. Like, it saying like, oh, not your horse, not your problem, that shit does not fly. Horses can't advocate for themselves. They're utterly reliant on their human beings. And if their human will not advocate for them, other people need to advocate for welfare on their behalf. And that doesn't happen with apathy and silence. So I understand for some people why it might be uncomfortable to join in some of these discussions and why they might not want to do it on their platforms. Understandable. But trying to deliberately silence reform in the horse world is not helping anyone, but most of all, it harms horses. Because like the degree of stress behaviors in the horse world is completely unacceptable. The degree of stress that we see in like modern horses and modern barns, and like the vast majority of like training and show barns and lesson barns, it's unacceptable. We can do better. Like we can, like everyone can do better. There's a better way. We can all improve ourselves. And that starts with actually being open to new information and wanting to learn. Like we can all do better. I promise it. Like even without completely altering how barns today are standing, there are ways we can immediately better the lives of our horses and their well-being. And all it takes is people caring enough to actually talk about it and not being so sensitive and insecure that they feel attacked by modern research. Like it's not your fault that you didn't know something that you've been lied to about. So instead of feeling like your person is being attacked, when people point out something that like a practice or management or training practice that you may be currently engaging in, instead of feeling like they're targeting you and calling you an abuser or calling you neglectful or whatever, consider the fact that they're merely targeting the practice and wanting the practice to change and wanting it to be less common. Because for me personally, like I have a lot of like connections in the horse world that keep their horses differently than what I personally think is right. But I don't think they're bad people. Most of them love their horses and care a lot about them immensely and are doing the best that they can for their horses, the resources that they have. However, like I think that it doesn't do anyone's horse favors to deliberately deny and ignore research. Like if we know that time spent stalled and time spent isolated increases stress and other health issues in horses, then we know that that's something that we should be working to limit as much as we can, and thinking and brainstorming ways of how to make that better. And that's really all it takes is like discussion, because it's not about completely going onto like my side of like what I think is ideal for how to keep my horses and like where my standards are for my horses and what direction I want to move into in for their care when I'm able to. It's not about completely conforming to someone like me's opinion. It's about compromise and meeting in the middle and starting to shift the norm closer to something that is more ethical and fair to horses. That's literally all it's about. And that starts with realizing why we've gone so far wrong and what contributes to that, because it's largely rooted in misinformation and people believing self-proclaimed professionals that have no other real credentials. And part of the reason why I've gotten so firm in my stance and like why I'm not willing to like give the same merit to non-researched opinion as I do to like the stuff that I've learned through schooling and otherwise is that like I've put work into alter my practices and learn more so that I don't continue to make the same mistakes. And it's taken a lot of like personal reflection and self-growth and holding myself accountable and being willing to learn things, even if it's hard to take in initially. And I'm not willing to completely discredit that education and discredit the information put forth by people way more experienced than me if it has the potential to better the lives of horses. So this is not anything to do with me, like any, or my beliefs. It has everything to do with like where the information is pointing. And if that information at any time changes to point in the other direction and show that there's actually more merit in the opposite way, the traditional way of doing things, then at that point I'll change my practices. But until then, I don't really think that I need to compromise on believing like what horses are actually meant to live like, or what is the most ethical way to train them, when there's a lot of information pointing in those directions. Just because other people don't want to believe it, that is 100% on them. And I say this as someone who used to not want to believe it. My insecurities back then, when I projected them onto other people and felt the need to disprove science and say all this BS to try to argue why I shouldn't have to change my current thought process, that was all on me. That was me projecting my insecurities onto other people, and me wanting other people to agree with me, to basically be like, hey, like, you're right, nothing's wrong, don't worry about the science, they're all wrong, no one knows. It had nothing to do with like anyone else or the information that they were putting out. It was all me and what I felt internally. And I think that speaks for a lot of people. Like, most of the people who are lashing out at me, they're not actually mad at me. They're mad at the information that I put out and how the information makes them feel. They're not mad at what I'm saying. They're mad at how it makes them feel, which I can't control how other people feel. I can't. And I'm also a person too. And being an online personality where you do a lot of talking and where you do podcasts and where you make videos, especially when you have a very like straightforward, kind of like to the point way of thinking, and communicate with that way to your colleagues and just talk about like behaviors as they are, it's very hard to not offend people who don't also think that way, because your mindset has shifted to be different, and it causes you to think in a completely different way. So people who aren't there yet, they're always going to end up feeling insecure or potentially targeted by what is said by people who have kind of done the work to not view it as personal when they're holding themselves accountable for previous practices. But anyways, that's the long-winded story of like what's going on with Milo, and kind of like what I think led to everything getting to that point. And I hope that some people listen to this and can relate to it, even if you're currently in a situation where you're recognizing some of the problems I listed off earlier in this live. Hopefully this will help you feel less alone, because I don't think enough people talk about the actual journey to bettering your horsemanship and what contributes to all of that, and what contributes to bad horsemanship, because most people don't get into horses wanting to beat horses and wanting to be mean to their horses and wanting to have stressed horses. People are conditioned into normalizing that and not seeing an issue with it, because there is so much misinformation out there. It's not about people actually wanting to cause harm, and at least not most of them. But also it hits a point where it's like, okay, like, let's draw the line at like not glorifying abuse, like not glorifying harshness. Let's not gloat about punching our horses in the face or hitting them with pitchforks. Like, even if you still use punishment as a training tactic, gloating about it and being proud about how hard you lay into horses, that entire mindset needs to go. It serves no purpose other than for people to brag about how hard they get mad at their horses. So that's a firm practice that I'm just like, no, let's not do that. No more. Come on, guys. We're better than that. But anyways, I'm getting tired of talking. So that's about that. But yeah, like, I'm well aware of the mistakes that I've made with my horses, which is why I'm trying to fix them now. So, I mean, like, if you want people to better their horsemanship and become better, when they do start to make the change, you can't just be like, oh, well, like, you messed up 5 years ago, man. It's like, yeah, we all did. Most of us did, unless you're like exceptionally lucky and you got the best science-based trainer ever. Like, I don't know if any of you guys know Steph K Equestrian. Go look her up. All of her students are so lucky. She has this barn full of kids who are learning things the right way from day one. Those kids are so fortunate. And I'm excited that there's going to be children like that that are going to become the faces of the horse world in the future. And I wish that I had gotten the same opportunities when I was younger, because I would have been way further ahead than I am now, and I wouldn't have caused as much harm as I have to horses at this point. But also, like, I wouldn't have the horses that I have now, and I wouldn't have learned the things that I have now. So it's not even that like I necessarily regret the direction that I've gone, because I don't think I would have gotten Milo and done the stuff that I've done if I didn't initially start out where I did. But I do feel guilty about it, and I recognize what it contributed to and how many problems it can cause horses without us knowing. And again, like, I never intended to hurt my horses. Like, even when I was actively engaging in what I would call like fully cruel training methods and like harsh training methods at the expense of my horse and being told to do that, even when I was actively doing that to show and stuff, I never didn't care about my horse. Like, I always loved my horse and I always like enjoyed spending time with him. And we're lucky horses are so forgiving, because realistically he didn't have much of a reason to like me. With how like he was ridden and kept and all that jazz. Like, he didn't really have much of a reason to like me, but he still forgave me and he was still kind to me and he still nickered to me when he saw me. And that trait of horses is why I so badly want to protect them and advocate for them, because they forgive us for so much BS and they forgive people for so much cruelty. Like, honestly, like the other thing to consider is that my position as a trainer, especially one that's specializing in behavioral modification for problem horses, the stories I hear and like the horses I meet and the stuff I hear that has happened to them, and seeing how forgiving and kind and sweet they are and how willing they are to learn and potentially trust people again despite what has happened to them, that solidifies the need to advocate for them. Like, I have some, I'm not going to say which horses these are because I want to give some anonymity, but I can't talk to the owners. But I've had horses who were roped and laid down and like, or hard tied and like left to a fence for days, or hobbled and then beaten, or like ridden and twisted wires and seesawed until their mouth bled and they had like sores, ridden in tack that doesn't fit until they have girth sores that are festering at trainers' places, and just being handled so roughly and cruelly that like you would expect that they have no reason to like people. And like, yeah, when they get here they're scared, but like their willingness to start to trust me and be willing to let people back in their lives despite how cruel people have been to them, that is one of the best traits about horses, and it's one of the main reasons we should all care about defending them, even if it means having the horse world change from being how we know it now. Like, I think it's still perfectly possible to do competition and riding and all that stuff without having it be how it is now. Like, there's ways we can do it better. There's ways we can reform this. And it's all about just kind of starting the conversation and actually caring enough to want to see those changes in the first place. So we should be grateful for how forgiving horses are, because if they were not forgiving, there would be a lot more people being maimed and killed by their reactions than there already are. And we already know that stress is a top contributor to human injury from horses. So we could limit injury to humans, we could limit injury to horses, all by starting to modernize the horse world. And that's all where it starts. So here's to doing just that. And here's to trying to fight the good fight and continue advocating for the voiceless, because you don't have to agree with everything I say. That's totally fine. I don't expect that. But just consider, like, do your own research, read the information out there, and seriously consider where your reactions are coming from, why certain topics may trigger you, and also like how honest you're being with yourself. Because I wasn't very honest with myself for a while. And it's way easier to stay in a diluted state than it is to completely own up the degree to which you've been misled and the degree to which you may have mishandled your horses. So, but we can't make changes without people being willing to talk about the problems in the first place, and talking about problems that a lot of people are complicit in across the board in the horse world. That is inevitably going to piss a lot of people off, and it's going to make a lot of people reactionary and feel like they're doing something wrong, because a lot of people are doing things wrong as per modern research and what we've learned about handling and caring for horses. But instead of continuing to do things wrong forever in fear of being told that you're wrong, why not start doing things right when you can? Because anyone can change. Like, for heck's sake, Clinton Anderson, for all we know. Like, I personally doubt this will happen just based off of what he's shown of his character. But if he decided to go the positive reinforcement route and start to better his horsemanship and apologize and own up for the stuff he's done to horses and sold to horses, I would be all ears. Like, even someone like that has contributed to so much mistreatment in the horse world. Anyone can change. It's never too late. You're better off changing now than you are continuing on doing things wrong for years and years to come. So that is my rant for the day. Keep Milo in your thoughts. His MRI is on June 6th. So that's 2 weeks from now, like 2.5 weeks away. So soon. That'll be fun. My boyfriend's also going in for shoulder surgery like 3 days before Milo. So I'm taking both of them to the vet. Not the actual vet, obviously, for Jesse, but they're both going to the clinic within like days of each other. So it's going to be a busy week. So anyways, I have a bunch of products on sale on my merch store with code Milo at checkout. And then I also have products on sale on the Amor Equestrian website for 10% off with code Milo. And there's also stuff that'll have like an extra discount that's already on sale. So if anyone's interested, I highly recommend checking out those products. I've just released some new base layer colors. I'm actually wearing one right now. Not the new color. This is the seafoam one, but I released the hunter green one. And yeah, all this stuff's on sale because I just need to move products to get my boy into the clinic because a lot of my money is in products. So you can check out any of these guys at like the Amor Equestrian website or go to my merch store if you feel like treating yourself. I also have Patreon if anyone wants access there for like asking questions and training help. That's usually the best place to go. But yeah, anyways, that's why I'm advertising so much. So bear with me because I am just but a small bean trying to navigate the world and pay for my horse's problems and also run a business and also buy all my inventory myself and be a girl boss. So I'm just going to keep advertising because we just need to get this stuff done. And then hopefully things will start to calm down soon. I've been saying that for years and it hasn't, but hopefully soon. Yeah. So anyways, it'll be a weight off my shoulders once we at least get an answer from this MRI, even if it's a bad answer, like it doesn't change what's already there. So I just need to know. But yeah, so that's the gist of it. If you missed this and came in later, I recommend rewinding so that you can kind of see like the actual direction that this live was intended to go in, because it might have a different vibe by the end, because I am just stream of consciousness and I'm constantly changing who I am as a person in conversation. Not actually, I just mean like what I'm saying and like the topics, because there's no rhyme or reason. I don't write scripts. My podcast is unscripted. It's all stream of consciousness. I usually don't even know what topic I'm doing until I start it. Damn. Anyways, so that's also why some of the stuff I say may seem less clear, or where you might be like, what is she saying? Or is she saying this? And it's like, sometimes I don't even know what I'm saying because I'm just talking as I talk and making my way to the end goal point some wraparound way. Anyways, ADHD. If you're also ADHD, maybe that's my demographic that actually likes me, is the neurodivergence of the world. That would be pretty cool. Anyways, have a good day, everyone. And if you're going through similar things to this, like, just be gentle with yourself, because making mistakes and doing things wrong by your horse when you didn't know better, like, you didn't do it maliciously. Don't beat yourself up. All you can do is do better with what you know now. You can't change what you didn't know then. You can't change who misled you with misinformation. All you can do is do what you can now and do better. So don't beat yourself up for past mistakes. I know it's hard not to, but try not to, because it's not your fault. There's a lot of people misleading masses of people. And those that should be held the most accountable for that are trainers and professionals and people who are posing as the most knowledgeable people in the horse world. They're the ones who should be held to the highest degree of accountability, and they're the ones that should be regulated the most, and they are not. So we need to demand that, especially if we want people to get more help and not be led astray to the extent that is currently being done. But anyways, thank you for coming to my 1.5 hour long TED Talk. Jeez, I don't need to post a podcast this week. This is just going to be it. So maybe I'll grab the audio from this and just post it on the podcast too, because I was going to record a podcast on this topic, but I just didn't have it in me. Anyways, at some point when I feel like it and I have time, I'll do a video with like the past videos of my riding so that you can see how lame this horse was and just kind of see what's going on. Most of the clips I've seen are from shows, so unfortunately the training practices, which are really sketchy and not great, I probably won't be able to show those in video format. I'll just have to explain them. So, but I think it'll be a good way to kind of show it to people, because seeing how young I was too, I feel like that kind of hits home how easily indoctrinated a lot of people are into modern horse practices, because a lot of us are just little babies when we start out. So it's very hard to not be indoctrinated. Anyways, have a great day, everyone. Thank you for listening to this. If anyone's interested in checking out those stores, the Patreon and the links, you can check them out and down below in the description. And yeah, don't forget to use code Milo at checkout for my merch store or the M or Equestrian website on the Milestone products. And yeah, so just stay tuned on my pages, and yeah, if you want to share my store links, I wouldn't complain, because I mean, free advertising is great, and we're going to be hurting for a little while because of these expenses, man. Like, I've just gotten crucified by vet bills recently. I had a joke with my vet. I'm going to just leave with this one last comment. I told my vet, I was like, hey, like, have you guys considered frequent flyer cards? Because I would be doing great if you had. Like, I would be your most frequent flyer, like getting a little punch card every time you need to make a vet call. I would be killing it and getting free vet care if they do that. But vets need their money. So obviously that's a joke. But yeah. Here's to thanking your vets and appreciating your vets, because horse vets in particular are also notoriously mistreated, and they have a very tough job because of the state of the industry and the lack of regulation. Vets are the highest regulated people in the horse industry. So thank your vets, because they have to deal with like so much BS from horse people because of the lack of education and regulation. So they're the best. And vets deserve appreciation and love. Anyways, have a great day, everyone. And thank you for listening to this podcast / live stream / whatever the heck this is.